Alright, how's it going, guys? We're back here for another Block Survival How to Play guide. Today's on William, and William is the pitcher that can make you richer by clobbering your foes with his dank baseball throws, as we'd say. Now, when I first started playing the game, I kind of looked over, did a quick glance over all the characters, tried to find the best character for me, or rather, the best character for me to win with, I suppose. That's probably the better way of saying it, but I looked over the characters, and two characters really struck me as kind of busted as hell and like most like OP characters in the game, and those two characters were Bernice and William. Now obviously playing the game, I learned a lot of things, and my perspectives changed quite a lot, but these are the characters that struck out for me. Bernice, because both his abilities are stupid as hell. Both his abilities are really good. Obviously, the more I played, I learned that they take a lot of support to make work, and they take a lot of effort to use effectively. But just objectively looking at the abilities, they seem really good. And what really struck me as William is, first of all, his stats. The biggest thing for me is his stats. His stats were really good. I was like, yo, his stats are crazy. Like, his stats are really good early. His stats are really good at the late game, and he's like good all throughout the game. Mid game, no matter what, he's always good. And his ability struck me as both really unique and actually potentially very powerful. Like to drain your opponent's stamina, to put pressure on your opponent's stamina. That seemed really cool as an idea, and to self-regain your own stamina. That also struck me as a really cool ability. Combined with the stamina stat that he gets, it really seemed pretty cool. I really liked that. I really liked that as a character. I think the thing with William that I kind of realized later on is throw is the biggest thing for me. I guess is that throw is kind of high maintenance, and that his abilities, while they're kind of cool on paper, they're both really underwhelming. And I'll kind of get into those, and I'll kind of get into those, I suppose. But I find he's kind of, in a way, kind of comparable to Leon. In a way, okay, he's not like Leon's like amazing, like god tier, but like I find he's kind of comparable with Leon just based on kind of how well-rounded his stats are, and kind of in that sense. He's also really kind of unique when you think about it, because he's really at the end of the day, he's the only character that interacts with your opponent's stamina bar, which is really cool because that kind of adds another dynamic to the game in a sense. I just find it pretty cool. I find it kind of interesting and very unique, and I think that's kind of something that's really interesting for William as a character. But in general, people either look at William as incredibly strong or as a meme, as kind of just something to laugh off. And a few patches ago, I don't think it was really up for debate a few patches ago. I think everyone just thought William was a meme, and William basically was a meme a few patches ago. But William has been steadily improving for pretty much the past several patches. So first with the throw buff that came a little while ago, and now with his most recent patch, the kind of the stat tweaking, the stat buff that they've been giving him. And even though his latest patch was kind of very recent, I think while there's room for improvement, there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, like I mentioned, I find his abilities kind of underwhelming, but he's certainly in a much better place than he was right now, and I definitely think there is a dialogue to be had between the people who look at him as a meme and the people who look at him as considerably strong, and I think he fits somewhere in between those two perspectives. I think he's definitely usable. There's very few characters I think are unusable, if any at all are quote unquote unusable. Actually, I don't even think any are really directly unusable. I think some characters might be outclassed. I think some characters might offer less than one other character might, while that other character might offer the same and better, if that makes any sense. But I think he's in a pretty decent place right now. I definitely think he can be used, and I like him a lot. I really wanted him to be good for the longest time, and I think the spot he's in right now is pretty good for him. So I'll get into his strengths and weaknesses right here. So his strengths, I mentioned this before, of course, but he's got very strong stats. He may not have kind of a lot of tricks up his sleeve, but kind of the raw power of his bulk, his offenses, and his mobility, those are kind of the focus of his kit, and I find they can be pretty effective. Like, his stats are pretty nice, like, for real. They're really nice. I do think his stats are pretty nice for him. He hits really hard early game, and he scales incredibly well into the late game as well, which is why I mentioned before he's kind of good throughout all periods of the game, but he hits pretty hard in the early game, and I think this in general comes down to a combination of kind of, like I said, his stats, but also for, like, just throw characters in general. Throw characters have a very quick. They have a lot of very quick, very powerful options for kind of their starter throw weapon. So Stormbolt, Tomahawk, Azure Dagger. They can all be crafted, and they can all be crafted in basically one area without moving locations. And they're powerful weapons, and you get in like 30 seconds, if that, and you get within searching for other materials. So it's all in one location. That's basically the key components of like Tomahawk, Azure Dagger, and Stormbolt, yeah, you get all of those in one area, and in that one area you can find additional items that you need. Fire Station, you get items to start building the Galaxy Watch, items to start building the Imperial Crown, Forest, you get a few decent things as well. You get the iron ore, you get a decent amount of things in there from the forest, and of course the chapel is just a really, really nice location as well for a lot of different things. A lot more defensive builds I find, but there's a lot of really nice things at the chapel. So starting at the chapel is never a bad thing. So if you get a early upgrade right there, that in itself is just really nice. And he can just kind of carry that into the late game. Like he gets kind of a good start with all this kind of options open for him at the very beginning, and that kind of scales along with just his stats. It scales incredibly well into the late game. He's got high mobility. This is obvious enough for, I suppose, for anyone who reads his abilities. But Inning Eater basically lets him kind of consistently be on the move in between locations. It lets him kind of keep topped up. I think people overestimate Inning Eater a lot. This is kind of why I'd mentioned previously that I find his abilities to be kind of underwhelming. But I think people, they look at Willliam and they're like, yo, he just never runs out of stamina, right? But honestly, Inning Eater isn't as sustainable as a lot of people like to think. So I think Inning Eater in tandem with another ability or another aptitude or another kind of supplementary factor I think that's effective, but I think Inning Eater on itself is a little bit weak. So if you can combo Inning Eater into something like Boots of Hermes or Cheng Pao or Angel Wing or even Accelerate, I like Accelerate because I find Inning Eater can kind of top you up while you're searching with Accelerate. I find it's like a top-up thing, whereas the other things just kind of work at the same time, and I don't know. I just like Accelerate for that option. I find it works together. I find people sometimes think of it as a meme to run Accelerate with Willliam because they just say, oh, you're not going to run out of stamina anyways, but you are going to run out of stamina, and if you play Willliam just assuming you don't have to make stamina items, then you're going to put yourself in a bad spot because you're going to run out of stamina items by not preparing for it. And then weaknesses. Going on to weaknesses, I've got a good lot of weaknesses that I want to list off for Willliam. First and foremost, I've been mentioning for the past while that his abilities I find extremely underwhelming. So I find Inning Eater to be very underwhelming. I find it's kind of nice when you combo it into something else, but on its own, as a kind of independent way of self-sustaining your stamina, I find it kind of lackluster. I don't like it a whole heck of a lot. It says in the game +6 stamina on every 10 moves in search, but it factors out to be +10 stamina in a sense because it basically refunds your turn. So on 3 stamina that you use 3 stamina on searching, 5 stamina on moving, so you get that stamina refunded to you. You still move or search, but you don't use that stamina, and then whatever the missing stamina is to bring you to 10 HP, you're going to be getting that supplementary stamina, not HP, that stamina, you're going to be getting that supplementary stamina back to bring you up to 10 stamina. So if you search, you're going to be getting 7 stamina, and you would have used 3, so you're going to gain 7. And if you move locations, you would have been using 5, so you're going to gain 5, and then you don't use 5. So technically, like I said, going to be topping you as up to kind of up to 10 in general. Like, just in general, both his abilities seem really, really interesting and really, really good on paper. Like I mentioned, like Inning Eater, like you just say these on paper and they actually sound pretty good. Like Inning Eater, you gain stamina, you gain free stamina. You know, that sounds great. But at the end of the day, you look at it and the amount you gain over the amount of turns is kind of lackluster, as I mentioned. And then Breaking Ball, you know, it sounds interesting. It's when you hit your opponent with a normal attack and they lose stamina, you know? And that sounds interesting, that sounds cool. And then you have to start asking, you're like, well, how much stamina do you lose? And you lose 20 stamina. And you're like, Well, okay, maybe there's redeeming factors. How much extra damage do you deal on the normal attack? Maybe it's, something, maybe it's something else that does extra damage. And the answer is it does no extra damage, doesn't do any extra damage. So that in itself also sounds pretty bad on itself. And you're like, well, okay, maybe there's another redeeming factor. How low is the cooldown? The cooldown's 40 seconds. And 40 seconds sounds on paper, like I said, very, very low. It's a very low cooldown ability. You're going to get it pretty much every fight, but you're only going to get it once every fight. Like, how many fights, realistically, I mean, unless it's like I guess an even 1v1, but how many fights realistically are lasting like full 40 seconds and the fight hasn't turned the tide? Not very many fights last like 40 seconds long. So you're gonna get you're generally gonna get Breaking Ball off every fight, but it's only once per fight. How a 20 stamina difference isn't gonna make that big of a difference. I think if it was like a 30-second cooldown and you could basically get 2 Breaking Balls off every fight, I guess maybe not every fight, but if you'd be able to get 2 Breaking Balls off on like a prolonged fight, I think that would be a lot better. Either that, or if there's a little bit more stamina that you took off, I think that would be interesting. Or if you dealt a little bit of skill damage. I think if you dealt a little bit of extra skill damage, that would make Breaking Ball pretty good as well. But for now, I find, like I said, Breaking Ball is very lackluster in a sense. I think it's a cool ability. I think both abilities are cool and very unique. But overall, I just find them very lackluster. Now, that kind of previous point alludes kind of into my second point, where Willliam has kind of very limited tools, which kind of leads to him playing a very linear, very predictable playstyle, and that kind of follows into combat. He's a very predictable in combat. He's not going to be having a lot of kind of tide-turning moments. He's not going to have kind of something you have to look out for. He's not going to be able to turn the tides of the battle pretty much at all. So basically, if he's winning a fight, then it's just like any other fight. The fight, he's if he's winning the fight, he could win the fight, or he could end up losing the fight by something changing kind of the course of the fight. But just in general, if he's winning a fight, then okay, he could win it. But if he's losing a fight, he's going to lose the fight. There's no wiggle room. There's no wiggle room for him to kind of come around, turn the fight around. If he's losing a fight, then he's going to lose the fight. He's very predictable in that sense. You know exactly what he's going to do. You know exactly what his abilities are going to do. I mean, you know what every character's abilities are going to do, but you're not exactly sure how they're going to be used, I suppose, if that makes sense. But Breaking Ball, because of how predictable his playstyle is, Breaking Ball isn't going to be changing the battle. Like, you're going to be hit, you're not taking any extra damage, so you don't have to be preparing for that with your recovery items, whereas something like Jenny with Revenge Play, you'd have to be watching how low you let your HP bar go, or else you can be kind of hit by surprise by a kind of pretty significant amount of damage. You don't have to worry about that with Willliam. There's no additional damage if you're taking 20 damage, and next time you're going to be taking approximately that much as well. You just have to kind of be wary, I suppose, about crits, but just in general, he's very predictable in that sense. His damage output is going to be very predictable. I'm kind of babbling right here, but you kind of know what I'm saying right there. Just, he basically doesn't have a lot of kind of tricks up his sleeve, if that makes sense. And as for kind of all throw characters, this is something I just have to mention for him because he's a throw character. I'd mentioned the same thing for Cicella. I believe I did mention the same thing for Cicella in my guide for her. I would mention this for any throw character. This isn't unique to Willliam, but his weapons are very high maintenance, and it's generally kind of a high risk, high reward scenario. And I mentioned this before. I've had a few people kind of ask me to kind of elaborate onto that, and it generally just comes down to kind of how a lot of things kind of need to fall in place for you to really keep up pressure with Willliam and to kind of get value with Willliam. So a lot of things kind of need to fall in place, basically with finding items with not being pressured yourself, to kind of keep stock, to keep management on your inventory, and to keep kind of cycling through your weapons to kind of keep your supply of good weapons, to keep a good supply of your good weapons, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. And like I said, I mentioned this before in one of my other guides, but yeah, if you run out of your consumable weapon, then you're back to square one. Whereas, I mean, this is similar kind of to defects, And just kind of in a similar regard, kind of item management is crucial for Willliam. It's crucial for a lot of characters just in general. Another weakness, he struggles kind of against characters that can use their tools to influence a fight, because like I mentioned, Willliam is very predictable. That's basically the biggest weakness for Willliam is as to kind of how predictable he is. So he's kind of a little bit leery against characters who can use tools to influence a fight, who basically are less predictable. He's a little bit weak against characters like those. So a character like Bernice, who can use leg shot to influence a fight, he doesn't want to be fucking around with that. A character like Shuichi's going to be giving him a lot of annoyance with Phony Deal as well. Jenny or Kiara, who can use their abilities as well to kind of influence the fight, can kind of turn the tides of the fight as well. He's kind of annoyed by that, but just he's kind of annoyed, and he kind of has weaker matchups against characters who are a lot less predictable, just based on playstyles. So I really want to quickly get into kind of how to play. I'm really trying to keep the length, the duration of this video as minimal as possible, because all my other ones got up to like 50 minutes plus, 40 minutes plus, some maybe just, I think one of them was like 30, which I guess was probably like the shortest one, but I really want to kind of keep the length of this video down as much as I can. So go into how he is best to be played. I think just in general, he's got a lot of options towards him just based on kind of his stat distribution. I think kind of the thing you want to work on is kind of capitalizing on the early game, because like I said, he's got high mobility with Inning Eater and with whatever you choose to kind of combo into it, but he's got high mobility, and that's very important when it comes to the early game fight for mastery. Having high mobility is really, really nice, because you can pop between areas. When you hear people fighting in other areas, you can pop to that area, and like I said, you're going to have a very, very strong early game weapon. You're going to have something like Stormbolt, you're going to have something like a Tomahawk, and those are going to be very, very powerful early game weapons, and just having that mobility with that power is going to be very, very key, and it's going to be very, very nice for kind of popping around areas very early in the game and playing kind of aggressively. He's easy enough to punish, I find. He's easy enough to punish because of how kind of predictable he is, but having that mobility, having those offensive capabilities early in the game is really, really nice for playing offensively, aggressively, very, very early. So get in an area, build a powerful early game weapon, and when you try to play as aggressively as you can when you hear noise in locations, because like I said, you've got the mobility to kind of pop around to different locations and back to your location, and you've got wiggle room for movement. And of course, as I mentioned, kind of just basically based on his stats, he's got pretty fantastic early game bulk. He's got really a great HP stat. He's got a pretty decent armor stat as well, and of course, just it scales so nicely as well. So that's kind of a really nice thing for him, to be able to kind of play aggressively, play offensively, get a lot of damage, put a lot of pressure on a lot of key characters. And I think I kind of talked earlier before, not in this video, but I talked to people before about kind of putting pressure on characters that kind of are going to be in the late game doing really well. So characters that you're going to be afraid of in the late game, I like to say try to put, or like, yeah, characters that are good in the late game, kind of weaker in the early game, I like to say try to put pressure on them to kind of interrupt their building, interrupt their growth. And people had said to me that, like, well, how are you supposed to pressure them if you don't know where they are? And it kind of comes down to knowledge of kind of the meta, knowledge of the characters, knowledge of the builds, and the common builds and the popular builds, and knowing where certain characters are going to be at different parts of the game. So if you're afraid of a later game character, then try to take the time to learn where they like to go throughout the game. Try to learn where the common places for them to start are, and try to harass those specific areas. There's not that many really areas that people can start off, honestly. Like, there's only a few really good areas that people start off. So learn the good locations to harass these characters, and of course throughout the mid game, try to learn where they're going to be as well. If they need wires, to be harassing the tunnel, harassing the factory, things like that. But throughout the mid game and into the late game, as long as you're able to manage your recovery, a healthy kind of increase of your mastery throughout the game, and kind of a steady increase of your armor quality, I suppose, if that's the word, I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but we'll say the quality of your armors, try to increase that. As long as you manage those things, leading into late game, he's a very scary thing. He's a very scary character to deal with, honestly. Like, if he can effectively utilize his early game aggression and effectively scale into his mid game, then late game he's incredibly hard to deal with. And I mean, assuming he doesn't run out of his items, right? Like, the more time you have to spend tailoring to your weapons, and tailoring to creating a steady supply of your weapons, the more time you have to do with that, the less time you have building up mastery, building up your armors, building up anything, getting recovery items, stuff like that. So as long as you're not, forced into a situation where you're spending too much time tinkering around with your weapons, I suppose, then yeah, pushing into the late game against Willliam is a very scary thing to do. It's a very scary prospect. Just like pushing into something like a Fiora late game is a scary prospect to have to do, I suppose. That's basically all I have to say about him. He's not a character that you have really a whole heck of a lot to say about him. I just find I want to get the strengths and the weaknesses kind of out there, because I find he's got a lot of strengths, he's got a lot of kind of weaknesses, he's got kind of a bit of a misconception, I think, with his abilities. I think people look at his ability, I think his abilities are really underwhelming. I think people put a lot of emphasis on Inning Eater and kind of look at Inning Eater as like some god tier ability. I find it's good when it's comboed into something else, but I find on its own as a standalone, as a standalone self-sustained stamina option, I find it not the best, and I find it overrated in that sense. And I wanted to get a lot of things out there. I find because on the same vein, I find he's very underrated in a lot of senses, and I find the people who look at him as kind of a meme, and the people who look at him and say, oh, he belongs in F tier, he belongs to be back in F tier, I find that's not true and doesn't give a accurate representation on his effectiveness as well. I find he's kind of in a good place right now, and I think I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of a video out on this topic, just to kind of talk about, and yeah, that's basically it. So I've got a lot of characters that I'm working on. I've got a lot of guides that I'm working on. Hopefully this guy was alright, because like I said, I'm trying to get this a little bit shorter, so hopefully it's not too short. Hopefully I got everything that I wanted to say out, and hopefully it's not too much babbling in between. With gameplay in the background, hopefully that should be fine anyways. But I'm working on, or I'm in the process of kind of collecting data and collecting information, and kind of working on a lot of things for a Sylvia guide, a Kiara guide, and those are kind of the main ones. I know, because I know people asked for those, as well as an Arda guide. I know someone had mentioned Arda as well. So those are the three characters that I'm going to be looking into in my next guide. I'm not sure if I'm going to do all three kind of consecutively, but I know my next guide is going to be one of those three characters. So, yeah, that's basically the plan. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and yeah, if you do want to see any one of those characters, then I will see you next time.